maybe divide up the things, sit down, look at the things that you need to do each week. And I know when you had 4 kids at home, maybe laundry was every day as opposed to once a week, or so put those down. And how do I do that? And what do I do with that hour while the laundry's in? Okay, is that the time that I do need to clean this or that? Just some things that you do to get it a little more organized, and also where you put in the times for you.
Work-life balance is not limited to the workplace. It's also the work of running your home, and it's really challenging for most couples to share this workload well. Today, Dr. Kim is sharing some of his best tips to help you and your spouse find work-life balance in your home. So the struggle to find a work-life balance does not end when you or your spouse get home from work. Taking care of your home and family is a huge portion of the workload that you cannot ignore, but you can find ways to handle it well together. So, Dr. Kim, what are some signs a couple is not doing work-life balance well at home?
Well, I think one of the obvious ones, if you're fighting more arguments, more conflict, and especially if you're arguing some because, how's our time allocated with work and home, or, are we getting a balance there? And we're not having the quality time that we used to have. Those kind of things the things that we talk about all the time that connect a couple. And so when you're not doing those and you're not connected, you're going to fight more. And so I think one of the ways is that just to look, are we fighting more, and why are we fighting? Sometimes, when Nancy and I had been in those situations, the next day, I probably couldn't tell you what we fought about, but we were just irritable and we just weren't connected. And so it was easy to do that. So then I think your intimacy becomes less. I think that would be, and not just sexual, but just sitting on the couch together, or just hanging out together, or holding hands, or, some of those things that we do that increase intimacy, that increase our closeness, that we just aren't doing those. And so those affect us, because then again, we're not feeling connected. God created us for physical touch. God created our sex life as a gift. And so when we're not doing those, that's going to be a problem. And then like household responsibilities, this is, you've walked past I've walked past your shoes on the floor for 3 days. You could at least pick your shoes up, or, I do the dishes every night and you never offer to do them, or things just don't get done. And then you're critical. I had a lady that used to work in our office, and she and her husband from the beginning did something. It's not for every couple. It really worked for them. And they made this pact with each other. If they see something like a household duty, chore, or anything like that needs to be done and it bothers them, then do it. And so instead of waiting for the other person to do it, or saying that's your job, and it really worked well for them. And I think sometimes we do get kind of in a game with it, and so, just sometimes it's okay. Just if you see something, just do it. Nancy likes to load and unload the dishwasher because she doesn't like the way I do it. And so, but when I do unload it for her or something like that, she really appreciates that. Really, it's more loading that she doesn't really approve the way I do it. But unloading, if I can help her do that. So sometimes it's just looking for those, and we don't do them, and that becomes a problem. When you're stressed, I think you can get some health issues if you're not sleeping well, and we just know how that can affect us. And then maybe you've tried to attack it, and you said, okay, we're not gonna check emails at home, or we're not gonna check emails after this time, or these kind of things, and then all of a sudden you start ignoring those boundaries, and that caused the problem. The idea was great, putting the boundaries, but then if you don't buy in and you're sitting there doing the things that you said you wouldn't do, that's going to cause a problem. And then, how's it affecting the kids? If you're not giving them some quality time, or the attention, or they're seeing mom and dad argue more, and so that security and stability is not there. So I think you can look at all of those, from arguing more, less intimacy, how the household stuff, how you feel health-wise, ignoring the boundaries, and then how doing your kids. I mean, those should all be red flags that we're not doing this work-life balance well when we walk in the door and we spend our time together at home.
Yeah, those are a lot of great ones to consider. So a lot of those seem like they, they seem like red flags. It's not like, oh gosh, I never would have guessed that arguing about it's a red flag, But it's like if it seems
Right.
it seems like we could pick that up, but people aren't always dealing with this well. So what keeps spouses from getting on the same page and handling this well?
Yeah, you're exactly right. It's amazing how we just don't. I think, well, poor communication certainly is a huge part of it. And we could probably talk about communication in every single episode that we do, because it affects about everything in our lives. And so poor communication, you're not talking, you're not communicating well, you're not talking about expectations and your needs and this work-life balance thing. That is a big part of it. I think just different priorities. What does work life look to me, and what does work life look to Nancy, and how does that affect what we do at home? And so if you've got somebody that is really wanting to advance in their career, I'm not saying that's bad, but when you do that at expense of family time with your spouse, those kind of things, that's going to, and your spouse is very much, we need family time. We need time together. I need time with you every day. Then those kind of things, so different priorities are going to cause conflict. And so not being on the same page with your priorities at home and how you're doing life can be a big part of that. And then I think too, the work demands are too much. It's just too demanding work schedule. Maybe you're in a job, there's a lot of frequent travel, long hours, those kind of things. And I think the difference is, and I've learned this from people I've talked to, if it's a season, it's like, we have this project this year. We've never had one like this before, probably won't again. But for the next 4 months, it's going to be tough. Well, I think if we look at it that way and you talk about it and communicate, I think a lot of times you can endure that. But if it's something that is not changing and it's affecting and it's not a season, then you got to look, how are we handling that? Financial pressure, I think, okay, we need to spend time together, but if we don't work as much, then how are we going to pay for our lifestyle? How are we going to do those kind of things? And so that financial pressure comes into it. And we also know that finances is a big piece of something people deal with a lot. And then I think we talked about the conflict, but it's when those are unresolved over and over and they linger and you haven't resolved things, then I think that keeps us from getting on the same page, because we're still dealing with conflict that hadn't been resolved from the past. And so all this stuff is stacking up and it keeps you from being able to do what you need to do, getting on the same page, because you still need to at least address those past conflicts. If they've passed and you're okay with it, fine. But if there's still something that needs to be resolved there, you need to take the time to do that. And I think in this, certainly counseling in some of these issues could help you. Christian counselor could help you get through some of these things, maybe help you communicate better, maybe help you get on the same page with things, and certainly help you to learn how to resolve conflict, which is really one of the best gifts you can give your marriage. If you can learn to healthy resolve conflict, then it just helps you see that no matter what comes, we can handle this. And if you don't, then it's like every conflict is just another something negative that goes on this pile.
Yeah, that's such a good point, because I think, the idea of conflict is so scary to so many people that we just avoid it altogether and shut down and run away from it. But you can't run forever. Like, you can't repair things if you don't address them. So that's huge.
I think most of us, a lot of people, and I did see conflict done well in the home. Most people, a lot of people that I see in counseling and talk to did not. And so it's not like that's always part of the role model that we have, that our parents showed us how to really resolve conflict well. And so I think it's realizing that it doesn't have to be something negative, that when you do resolve conflict, I mean, that's something to celebrate. It's really resolving conflict. For me and for us, a lot of times it was just taking the time to really listen to each other and to value what they were saying. And so many times we would figure out we really weren't that far apart. The words that we said made us feel that we were, but when we got down to the bottom line, we were pretty close together on that. And so resolving conflict doesn't have to be a bad thing. Sure, it takes work and effort, but when you talk and listen well, you'll find that you can really, most things you can resolve.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yes. Yeah. And just even not fearing it is going to help you learn how to engage that well. I think that's a huge skill that we can learn.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's good. So, okay, so let's take this
Yes.
into this working and home workload conversation. So, what are your tips for working parents to approach the needs at home together?
Communication again.
Hmm.
Okay, what are those needs at home? What do we need to do? Taking time to just have a timeout where you guys sit down and say, okay, we are not doing this well.
Mm.
Something we got to get on top of it. And I think it starts there. It
Hmm.
starts there with communicating what are the needs here and how do we address them.
Hmm.
Um, I think you've got to have quality time together as a couple,
Hmm.
just where you spend time together, where you catch up with each other, where you can talk about communication. I think you've got to have boundaries with technology,
Hmm.
um, whatever works for you. And I think, it's so funny. I said this to a couple the other day. I said, you guys are so upset about the way your kids use their cell phones, and you guys haven't figured it out either. And they looked at me kind of funny at first, and they go, you're right. And I think a lot of us as
Yeah.
parents haven't. I think we're in
Hmm.
the same boat as our kids are. We just can punish them, send them to the room, or ground them from the
Yeah.
phone. And we don't do that with each other. We just, So I think having the boundaries with technology, knowing
Hmm.
that the relationship is more important than any of those things.
Hmm.
And then agreeing to really to abide by those things, to
Yeah.
value that. And for some people, it's almost going to be like an addiction coming off of
Mm.
something that you are addicted to, because I think a
Hmm.
lot of it's habit. I mean, I've gone
Hmm.
through that where I'm just not doing anything for 10 seconds, so I pick up my phone.
Yeah.
And there's nothing. Sometimes it's not because it beeped or did anything. It's
Right.
just I thought the other day when I was standing in line at Starbucks, and how in years ago, I guess it was years ago, before really cell phones were that big a deal, how much fun we had talking to each other in line at Starbucks, and how
Mm.
many people
Hmm.
I kind of got to know or connected, or they're at the same time, and you talk a little bit, and we're standing with our phones. And I don't know, I'm not criticizing it because it's just our culture right now, but I think at home we
Hmm.
can do something about it. I can't do anything about the people at Starbucks in line,
Right. Right.
unless I see somebody I kind of know. And then usually when you do that, they're going to say, and you're going to talk to them.
Yeah.
But at home, you can do something about it. And so
Yeah.
it's whether it's technology, whether it's your mobile devices, or even any kind of screens, whatever those are, just having some boundaries there that
Hmm.
free up the time to communicate, to have quality time together, to do the things that you really value, and they're going to make a difference. I mean, at the end of your life, you're not going to look back and say, God, I wish I'd looked at my phone a few more times. I mean, you're just
Right.
not. You're just
No.
not.
Mm-mm.
You're going to wish, I wish I put my phone down more and spent more time with him or more time with her,
Hmm.
doing the things that would have would help build a marriage that we both
Hmm.
wanted. And I think when you're going through these things, the other thing I would say, if you get stuck, it's okay to get help. It's okay to talk to a mentor couple. Maybe you know a couple that seems to be doing this really well. Maybe
Mm.
they're a little bit older than you, but you can tell they're doing it well. Take them to dinner, take them to lunch,
Hmm.
invite them for coffee, something just to talk about that. And the other thing certainly can go to a Christian counselor and kind of lay
Hmm.
these things out and let somebody because these things we're talking about today as a counselor, we deal with all the time. They may
Hmm.
not be the big presenting problem when someone comes in, but when we kind of work through some of these things to get some things in place where there's balance and there's
Hmm.
time and the quality time and communication, it helps set the stage to deal with some of the other things that are there.
Mm. Man, that's good. I mean, it's funny. I'm married to a pastor. We talk about walking with Jesus and like how it shapes our life every day, pretty much. But almost all of our conversations are come back to how the things that we that matter, working on things that matter, works itself out in the very small details of life. It really works itself
Absolutely.
out in the dirt of every day. And so these things, like I would just give an encouragement. All this stuff really matters. Like living well in these areas matters, and it can really change your life. And so I love
Hmm.
that you're bringing us to all that stuff, Dr. Kim, because it's really hard to look around. Even when you say looking for a mentor couple, it's like, okay, well, you're not going to find a perfect one, you know, but if you find a couple that's
No.
got like some of the things, you can still learn some things from them. So I think it's just that encouragement of like, we're not looking for perfection. We're not looking for something necessarily grand, but it's like, how can we be faithful to do these things well in our actual homes, in our actual marriages, in our actual lives? And it's small choices that they do feel like sacrifices when you want to pick up that phone instead of having to do math homework with your kid, like, well, there's a place where
Yes.
it feels like a sacrifice, but that is an opportunity. And so I think it's
Right.
those things. Yeah. So,
No, absolutely.
Okay, that's really good. So that's, was there anything else you wanted to get into in that category?
No, I think that covers the things that we're talking about. Just, yeah.
Good. Okay. Okay. So then let's talk about what about how do we find balance if that is where we are?
Well, I think you've got to have your priorities each day. What's your day going to look like? You got to put some structure around it. I think that's really important. What do you have to do during the day at home? How does that line up then with your family needs, with taking care of yourself, with your spouse? And then what's most important that day? I mean, if you got a project or something you're working on with your job, then that's got to take a priority that day. But then also, you still have to walk out of that home office or wherever you do your work at home and be with your family, be with your spouse, and take care of yourself. And so I think just figuring all that out, the routines, I guess is what I'm saying. There's going to be interruptions, sure, but to have kind of a routine, I think is really important. The people I've seen that have begun working at home, a lot of them didn't work at home at all till COVID came, and a lot of them are continuing to work at home at least part of the week. And the ones that seem to have done that most successfully really did create some rhythms at home that really helped with that. Consistent time of day that they worked, a consistent time of the day that they quit working, consistent time of day that they spent time with their spouse and their kids and things like that. So I think all those routines can really make a difference and help you. And, I think that one thing that everybody likes about staying at home is flexibility. So you don't want to throw that out because, if it's a Tuesday and my kid's got a basketball game at 3:30, okay, usually my routine would be that I work till 5, but I get the flexibility to go to that game at 3:30. And so you just work around that and enjoy that flexibility. And what I've told people too, just because you take an hour and a half out to go to that basketball game doesn't mean you have to work till 6:30 instead of 5. It's okay. It's okay to come home and spend the rest of the day with your family and then take it up a notch the next day to make sure you get everything done. Give yourself some grace, I guess, with all of that. I think some of us get, some people have trouble getting into a routine, and some of us have our routines and we get so rigid with them that we can't. I'm supposed to work 8 hours a day, so I was gone for 3 hours. I got to work till 9 o'clock tonight. No, you don't have to do that. You can give yourself some grace there. I think too, sharing responsibilities at home if you work from home. And just so you're both working together on that, I guess, because I don't see a lot where household chores become an issue, but sometimes it does. And I think especially, if a lot of people that both of them work from home. And so how do we do those kind of things and do it in a way that helps our marriage and not take away from it?
Yeah.
Make sure you have your me time, your exercise, your hobbies, reading, relaxing. I think the other thing that I see with stay-at-home parents that are both home working is you've got to also have some social connections outside of that. And I think sometimes, and I think for introverts or people who lean that way, it's been a little harder. You had a great excuse during COVID because you couldn't see anybody, for a while, or you had to mask up and people, all the stuff that we had to do during that time. But I think that's important, very much so. Be just communicating well, openly, honestly with each other, supporting each other in what you're doing. If you're both working from home, maybe when you sit down and kind of look at your week, you're saying, hey, this is going to be a really busy week for me. And so you decide together, okay, where are we going to carve out time for us, for the kids, for who's going to do homework this week? Hey, you've got this project I'll take homework this week, and next week we'll balance it out again. Just that communication where you're working together and supporting each other in that. And I think some couples are really doing this well and really enjoying it and really enjoying being together and being at home, all those kind of things that go along with that. And then try not to multitask. I threw that one in there because that's something I've really learned a lot about the last year. I finally accepted the fact that I can't multitask as much as I think I could or can. But someone I listened to on a podcast just said, you can really only focus on one thing at a time well. And I agree. If I'm, I think it's just try not to multitask. It leads to stress. And I don't think you're going to do both things well. I don't.
I agree. I'm definitely someone who I never really felt like I could multitask unless I'm like listening to a podcast and doing a chore. That's, I think, a little different. The mental and the physical combined.
Right. Yeah, because I work out and listen to either Biobursts or a podcast or a book or something like that. So yeah, I can do that. It's when I'm doing a couple of things that are pretty significant or pretty important. That makes a difference. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's something that's really helpful. I want to get into more. You had a lot of good stuff there for people who are working from home, but I want to hear also about if it's a parent who is staying at home, so they are not employed outside the house, but their full-time role is as a stay-at-home parent. And so I think for me, I know that was when I was full-time, not employed outside the house, but stay at home. That was probably the hardest time not to multitask because there are so many tasks that need doing. If you're home, you see them all. And so learning how to do one thing at a time is challenging because say you're going to start the laundry. Well, you can't just do that because you're going to wait an hour for it to come out, and then you put it in the dryer and then you wait an hour for it to come out of there. But learning how to work within a workflow that's actually productive instead of just being scattered was super challenging for me. Do you have any tips for the person who is just at home full time?
No, I think that's really good. And I think it depends. You had time when you had 4 kids at home. And depending, and not to say the stay-at-home moms with one kid is not enough because one kid that's active, I've got a lady I see right now in counseling and has a toddler that is about 2. Oh my gosh, it is a full time because this little boy is, very, very active, very intuitive, and so all that kind of stuff. So it doesn't, certainly it's a difference, but it's a challenge with with your children. You have to do that. And I think, maybe I go back to, I thought my grandmother, I remember this was back when I was growing up and I spent so much time with them on the farm, but her schedule was, she had certain things she did every day. Monday was wash day, Tuesday was hanging on the clothesline outside, Wednesday was clean this, do that. So she broke that down, but she also had time for, I can remember that my granddad obviously was working out in the field and stuff like that and farm and stuff. And she helped with some of those things that she would do, but she would have the things each day and she cooked the meals. And they really had to, when I think about them, they really divided things really well. And they also took time for each other. My granddad came in for lunch every day and he was there an hour. They ate and then they sat down together and they relaxed and talked or watched something like that. And then at 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock, whenever it was, they would sit down together and have a Coke or something like that and just hang out together. And when I look back on them, I thought, they really figured that deal out. I mean, she knew what she was going to do every day. He knew what he was going to do every day. They took time for each other. They took time to take care of themselves. And I think that's why they were so successful in their marriage and the things that they did all of their lives. It was amazing. And so can we learn from things like that? Yeah, I think maybe divide up the things, sit down, look at the things that you need to do each week. And I know when you had 4 kids at home, maybe laundry was every day as opposed to once a week or, so put those down and how do I do that? And what do I do with that hour while the laundry's in? Okay. Is that the time that, okay, I do need to clean this or that? And maybe you divide up the house and you do, cleaning on maybe a deep clean on one room every week or every 2 weeks or something like that, or just some things that you do to get it a little more organized. and also where you put in the times for you. The time that now, when you've got little kids, that's harder. If you can get them all to nap at the same time, that's when you need to nap, or you sit down or do your quiet time or something like that, because you don't get a lot of free time in that.
No.
They want to be, and if you told them, Mom's just going to go in here and be quiet for a while, so you guys go do something, what happens?
Oh, you don't want to know. The house might not be standing.
No, or they're all in there because they don't. What's Mom doing? Why did she need to be away? And our pastor was telling how when his wife would go sometimes, and they had 6, and just go to the bathroom is the only place she'd go, and she'd go in the bathroom, and then these little fingers would be coming under the door. I mean, it's like, no. So I guess what I'd say to the mom or dad, and certainly the stay-at-home dads that stay at home, is kind of get some organization around things you need to do. Also, make sure you have the time. If you're home and your kids are little, you want to make sure you have that time to interact with them, and the benefit of being home with them. You didn't decide to stay home when your kids were a certain age because you wanted to get more housework done. You stayed because you wanted to invest in them more. So just make sure you do that. And then being prepared for when your spouse comes home to take time with them. So I think it's really finding some balance there, and the things that are important to you, the things that need to be done, taking care of yourself. And then it's going to equip you to better take care of your family and your husband, your spouse, those kind of things. Does that make sense?
I think so. And you know what it reminds me of? It takes me back to the top of this episode where you really encourage us to get a handle on conflict resolution, because I think as you're talking about it more, it's like, this is really nuanced, and it's so individual, because I think one of the big things is like, okay, there's a lot of mental overload with being at home full time. There's a lot of tasks that go unseen, really. I mean, it kind of looks like if you fed the kids 3 times and then cleaned them after them, it kind of looks like you did nothing. Like, it's like, okay, what do? We just emptied the fridge and emptied the dishwasher multiple times. Like, there's not really much to show that you've done something, but you have. And so I think this conversation can feel frustrating in those stages, because it feels like you're kind of doing and redoing the same things over and over. And so the tasks can feel like very monotonous and hard to manage. And I think there's a place there where it's important to be able to name these, issues you might be having. If you feel unappreciated, or if you feel like you're bearing too much of the load just because you are home, you're the default doer of everything, that's a really important place to shore up your communication and conflict resolution, because those things can become really burdensome. You could build resentment. And also, I think that you could easily take on some unrealistic expectations based on what you think other people are doing, or what social media might suggest other people are doing. Maybe you think everyone else is doing it all, and so you're trying to do it all. And I don't think that's realistic or healthy. So I think you have to figure out, it's kind of going back to that rating system of like, what are the most important things here? Let's rate these tasks. And like you said, doing the housework isn't always number one. So don't try to make it the most important thing, but put some balance in there of having some good routines and expectations, but also having some grace and knowing, it's not really about the mop, and those things do have to happen, but you don't have to make yourself a slave to those chores and tasks too.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's so good, because it's easy to kind of fall in those traps and not really know sometimes that you've even fallen into it. And I think that's really helpful.
Well, that's the benefit of having suffered through that.
And exactly. If we, God teaches us things, and our job then is to learn from it, and to either be able to apply it to our lives at that time, or to pass it on to somebody else. Yeah. So you're able to do both.
Totally. Yeah. Because I was really stubborn. I wanted to do it all, and so that's put myself in a corner there.
Yeah. And I think some people are wired that way. Some of us are wired that way. And just giving yourself permission that you don't have to do everything,
right,
can be so helpful.
And you can't, so it's okay.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
that's good. Well, so let's talk about kind of where we came out of all those practical tips. Was we kind of came back where we started about communication, conflict resolution, really our bread and butter here,
Yeah.
So what what can a couple do to work as a team together? Because that's one thing you encourage us to do. And I think it's really hard to do because there can be, like we talked about, stress, resentment, all these
Right.
kind of things. So, how can you be a better team? How can you do that well?
I think it's important to talk about what you really want your life to look like together.
Mm, hmm.
What are your goals? If your goals is a great marriage, what are we doing this season today that accomplishes that?
Mm,
Does fighting help us have a great marriage? No. Does
hmm.
resolving conflict help us have a great marriage? Yeah.
Hmm.
Does not communicating have a great marriage? No. So I mean, if that is your end goal, then you can look at what are we doing today? Okay, we are fighting a lot. We got to figure this out because it's not going to give us the goal that we want.
Hmm.
And so I think that helped. It helped us a lot to do that. It helped us a lot with our kids, and we want to decide what are our goals with our kids in the
Hmm.
18 years that we have them at home. And it
Hmm.
was we obviously wanted them to know Christ. We wanted them to experience certain things, those kind of things. And so then each season of their life or each year, we could say, okay, these are the things that are important to us for them during this season. And so
Hmm.
if you have kind of those goals and then you each day, what do we do to get there? Then you begin to work as a team. And you've got the end goal there.
Hmm.
And you're both working for the same thing. You may get there a little different,
Hmm.
but I think it helped us to see that yes, Nancy and I, and sometimes did things different than the other one would do it, but we both were headed toward the same goal. So that
Hmm.
difference was easier to accept and embrace because we'd already agreed on where we want to go with
Yeah.
that. And so if you want a great marriage, well, then you know the things that are going to help or not help. And so for us, that gave us a kind of, I guess, a roadmap that
Hmm.
really made a difference. And not that, it was just kind of, it would help. I think it also helped us see red flags
Hmm.
because when you really stop and think about it, uh, yeah, that's not going to help. Okay. We need to do
Hmm.
something about that. Whatever it was that wasn't working toward our marriage being
That's so good.
what we wanted to do.
Hmm. Yeah, that's so good because it's so easy to get lost in the details here. It's like really easy to get in the
Yes.
weeds, but you're saying let's keep the big picture in front of us so that we go towards where we want to go.
And then when you get in the weeds, you
Hmm.
realize we're in the weeds
Yeah.
and you don't
Yeah.
get mad at each other. You don't blame each other. You're just saying, okay, we're off track here. What do we need to
Yeah.
do?
Hmm.
And
That's so
then,
good
and
because
then when you come
that's a
back to
we.
that, yeah, and you've set that goal. So now you come back and work on it together instead of
Hmm.
saying, you're just a jerk. We're never going to have a good marriage, which
Right.
does not much, doesn't do a lot for having a good marriage. And so,
Yeah.
so I think that's all part of it too.
Hmm. Yeah, that's huge. That's huge. So if there's a spouse listening who just feels alone in this today, maybe this workload conversation is just it's not gone well. They feel stuck. They're really struggling. What encouragement can you give to that person today?
I think that there's always hope.
Mm.
And I know sometimes that's hard to see when you feel like you're kind of buried, but there
Hmm.
is hope. And I think what I would say is focus, what can you do today? Just
Hmm.
find one thing that out of all the stuff that really spoke to you that we've talked about, and do that one thing.
Hmm.
And that will help you begin to make those steps out of where you are.
Hmm.
Um, and it may be that at your point where you just need some guidance. And so don't hesitate to go to counseling, just
Hmm.
to say, lay all this out in front of a counselor and let them help you piece some things together, either individually or as a couple.
Hmm.
But I would say focus on what you can do. One of the prayers that I think is so good when you feel like you're in this alone is, God, help me be the husband or the wife today that you want
Hmm.
me to be.
Hmm.
And then it becomes a deal between you and God. And it's not as much the focus then on what my spouse did or didn't do. The
Hmm.
focus comes back on us and our responsibility before God to be the husband or wife that they called us to be on
Hmm.
that day. And to me, that accountability, when it changes and it's just between me and God, that makes a difference. And
Yes.
and the prayer is then in that your spouse will notice
Hmm.
and that your spouse will want to come alongside you.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. That's good. That's really good. And even if they don't, you still are doing the right thing. So that's
Right.
taking you in a good direction personally.
Yeah. And, there may be times where your spouse it's just going through a hard time. And it's not there. So, okay, what do you do to support them? And we took the vows for all those better, worse, all those things that we said at that time. If it's a season, then how do you go through that? If it's longer than a season, then maybe that's where counseling needs to come in to get you guys on the right track.
That's good. That's good because that'll get some things on the table.
Yes.
And I think that reminds me too. I don't know if we said this explicitly enough for my liking as a woman, but I think it needs to be said in this conversation that as women, I think a lot of times we assume that our spouse sees all the same things that need doing around the house in the same way that we do and is ignoring them on purpose to make us mad. I don't know. Do men deal with that as much too, Dr. Kim? Or is this more of a wife thing?
I think around the house, I think our wives usually do see things that we don't see, and they become a priority. And especially if you're working from home or a stay-at-home mom, you're faced with that all the day. And so if your husband's leaving, coming home, and you're the one who has to look at that or deal with that, or the dishwasher that hadn't worked in 2 months, and those kind of things. One of the things that I'll just learn, this is totally rabbit trail, but a couple did that I thought was really good, and he would always say, "Of course I'll fix the dishwasher." And so they set a time frame. She said, "Well, how long is it going to take you?" And he said, "Give me a month." And so if it's not done in a month, she then has the right to call the repairman. And so that kind of solved it for them. And sometimes she called the repairman and sometimes he got it done. But it took that conflict out of it. That took all that, oh my gosh, there's another weekend and he still hadn't done it. It put some parameters around it. I think sometimes things like that really make a difference because it takes the conflict out of it. Or like you were saying, he's just ignoring that. He's just trying to irritate me.
Yeah.
And
that's a great suggestion. I love that.
Yeah, it was a win-win for everybody in that. He didn't feel guilty about not getting to it. She didn't have to feel like she had to nag him or think these negative things. And it was definitely a win for their marriage. So looking for things like that. And, sometimes those answers, when we talk about them, Lindsay, can seem so simple. But when you're in the midst of it, sometimes it's like, I didn't think about that.
Right. Oh, yeah.
And so taking time to say, what are some options here for us? Okay, we're fighting this every time something breaks. And then there's some couples, the husbands then go, call the repairman. I could try to do it, but it's going to be horrible. Yes. So,
good old self-awareness. I like it. That's good.
Yes, that's exactly. Exactly.
Yeah, but I love too that it's like in that situation, you're talking about it together, you're agreeing on it together, you're not blaming, but you're actually articulating, this is something that's important to me. I want us to work together instead of just saying, well, I sure hope he notices the dishwasher, or hinting like it would be nice if someone would fix the dishwasher. Like we have to make sure we're saying what we mean and what we need instead of, hoping that they just catch the hint.
Yeah, because if he never uses the dishwasher, he's not aware of it every day like you are.
Right.
When you've got those dishes piled up and you've got the kids and all that. And so, it's okay. That's what I tell people all the time. Ask your spouse, tell them. Yes, and if they still don't do it, then you can deal with that, but at least give them a chance to do it.
Absolutely.
Because you can't read each other's minds. We've talked about that a lot.
Well,
we've talked about each other's minds.
We've talked about it because everyone's out here trying to do it. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
Like it's in ministry. It's like I never get over the fact that so many times somebody has an issue, their spouse has no idea they have it. It's like, well, just tell them, give them a chance.
Absolutely. Yeah. And a lot of times I think you'll be surprised by the response. Sometimes that I haven't done something or figured out something Nancy wanted, and then she tells me, and I do it, and it's like, I don't know, it's like a miracle happened or something, I guess, in her mind. But yeah.
Yeah. And it's true. It's like you said, like so much of this stuff seems simple on paper. It's not. And we know that. We're not trying to out here oversimplify it. But just to give encouragement that you can talk about these things, and that's a fine thing to do. And I do want to make mention now, since you've brought it up, Dr. Kim, a couple times, the boundaries. We do have a whole podcast series we did last year on boundaries, kind of breaking that down, how to set them, all that stuff. And we have a course on boundaries. If you want more information, that would be a great place to look, because it's a really hard topic sometimes to get a handle on how exactly to implement. Absolutely. But there's a lot of good stuff in there, both in the podcast series and obviously in the course, that can help you make that practical in your marriage. So this has been a helpful and encouraging conversation. Do you have any final piece of advice for us today, Dr. Kim?
Well, calculate your life balance in your marriage, in your home. And maybe you sit down with your spouse tonight and say, hey, I listened to this podcast, ask this question. How do you think we're doing on this? And kind of evaluate it and say on a 1 to 10, maybe this is a deal you rate. Hey, we're doing a 6. Well, what would make it a 7 then? I always ask that when you're rating on things like this. It's like, okay, well, 6 isn't horrible, but what would make it a 7? And then begin to talk about some of the things that might help you get there. And again, doing it as a team and working together on it.
Yeah, that's so good. So simple. So I think that's a great place for us to leave today. Check the show notes for all those things I've mentioned today. I know there's a lot of things that worked their way in there. I want to mention we have an episode coming up with Jordan Rayner, who is going to be talking all about why our secular work matters for eternity. So in the midst of this work-life balance conversation, I think his voice is just really helpful to help us understand really what the Bible says and maybe some things we think it says, but it doesn't, about work and why work matters and all of that. So make sure you do not miss that episode. It's going to be so helpful in this conversation. So as always, thanks for joining us today and spending your time with us. Have a great day and do something awesome for your marriage today.